The city was buzzing with life, its streets glowing under the flickering neon lights. Somewhere in the heart of it, where the roads twisted like a maze, a group of men sat inside a dimly lit cafe, their eyes shifting cautiously as they spoke in hushed voices. These weren't ordinary men. They were experts in deception, masters of escape, thieves who never got caught. But tonight, they were planning something bigger, something riskier than anything they had ever attempted before. Ravi, the sharpest mind among them, leaned in, his fingers tapping lightly on the worn-out wooden table. "We can't leave a single trace this time," he murmured. "Not even a shadow." His companions nodded. They knew what was at stake. The plan had to be perfect, down to the last second. Amit, the youngest in the group, shifted nervously. "But what if something goes wrong?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of conversation around them. Ravi smirked. "That's the beauty of it. Even if things go wrong, no one will ever know we were there." The plan was genius, flawless on paper. A high-profile museum, a priceless artifact, and a security system designed to be impenetrable. But Ravi had found a loophole, a trick so simple yet so mind-blowing that even the best security experts wouldn't see it coming. It wasn't about breaking in. It was about making the world believe they were never there in the first place. As the night deepened, the cafe emptied, but the group remained, their whispers weaving a web of deception and brilliance. The countdown had begun. In just a few hours, the world would witness a heist so perfect it would leave everyone stunned. But what they didn't know was that someone was already watching. Someone who was just as clever as they were. Maybe even smarter. And with that, the real game had just begun. The air outside was crisp, carrying the distant hum of traffic as Ravi and his team stepped out of the cafe. The streetlights cast long shadows, stretching over the pavement like silent observers of the night's secrets. Amit pulled his hoodie over his head, his fingers twitching slightly. He wasn't scared, at least, that's what he told himself. But this job was unlike anything they had done before. The stakes were higher, the risk greater. Ravi walked ahead, calm as ever. He had been planning this for months, studying every detail, every flaw in the security system. The museum's layout, the patrol timings of the guards, the exact moment when the cameras would momentarily reset. He had it all mapped out in his mind. This wasn't just another job for him. This was a challenge, a test of his intelligence. If he could pull this off, they wouldn't just be thieves. They would be legends. As they made their way through the quiet streets, Ravi glanced at Aman, the tech expert of the group. Aman was a man of few words, but when it came to hacking and gadgets, no one was better. He carried a small bag slung over his shoulder, filled with devices that could manipulate security systems, intercept signals, and even erase digital footprints. "How long will we have once the cameras go offline?" Ravi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Aman didn't look up from his phone. 60 seconds, he said. "That's all I can give you before they reboot." Ravi nodded. "That's more than enough." The plan relied on precision. A single mistake, a delay of even a few seconds, could ruin everything. But that was the thrill of it, the challenge that made it worth doing. As they turned a corner, a soft chime echoed from a nearby shop. An old man was closing up for the night, locking the doors of his small store. He glanced at the group for a moment, his eyes lingering on them before he disappeared inside. Amit exhaled, relieved when they finally reached their hideout, a small, abandoned garage tucked between two buildings. The place smelled of rust and oil, the remnants of an old workshop scattered around. This was where they had been planning everything, where every move had been rehearsed over and over again. Inside, a large blueprint of the museum was pinned to the wall. Red markings covered the paper, indicating entry points, exits, and possible obstacles. Ravi walked up to it, tracing a path with his finger. "We enter through the east wing," he muttered, mostly to himself. "Aman takes care of the cameras. Amit and I handle the artifact." We have exactly 3 minutes to get in and out. Amit sat on an old wooden crate, running a hand through his hair. And if something goes wrong? Ravi turned to him with a smirk. It won't. But somewhere deep inside, he knew that confidence alone wasn't enough. Every heist had an unpredictable factor, something no amount of planning could control. He just hoped they wouldn't have to face it. As the night stretched on, they went over the plan again, refining every detail. Aman set up his laptop, running simulations, checking for any last-minute updates on the security system. Everything had to be perfect. But outside, hidden in the shadows, a pair of eyes watched them. Someone knew. And that meant trouble. The night felt heavier than usual, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Inside the garage, the dim glow from Aman's laptop flickered against the walls. The plan was solid, nearly foolproof, but Ravi couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had always trusted his instincts. They had saved him more times than he could count. And right now, his instincts were telling him they weren't alone. He walked to the small window near the back and peered out into the darkness. The alley was empty, just like it had been a few minutes ago. But he couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. He had spent years in this game, and if there was one thing he knew for sure, it was that nothing ever went exactly as planned. Amit noticed his silence and sat up. "Something wrong?" he asked, his voice careful. Ravi shook his head, stepping away from the window. "Just thinking," he muttered. "We need to be extra careful tomorrow." Amit exhaled sharply, rubbing his hands together. "Careful is all we ever are. You really think something could go wrong?" Ravi didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the blueprint, tracing the lines again as if looking for something he might have missed. Meanwhile, Aman was focused on his screen, his fingers moving rapidly over the keyboard. He had tapped into the museum's internal system, monitoring the security logs for any recent changes. Everything seemed normal, until he saw it. A new entry. A security upgrade. His heart skipped a beat as he clicked on it. The museum had installed an additional motion sensor near the east wing entrance, just 2 days ago. It wasn't in the original schematics they had studied. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "We have a problem." Ravi turned instantly. "What is it?" Aman pointed at the screen. "They added a motion sensor. It wasn't there before. If we step into that zone, the alarm will go off instantly." Silence settled over the room. This changed things. It wasn't a small obstacle. It was a complete shift in the plan. Amit swallowed hard. "So, what do we do?" Ravi stared at the screen, his mind racing. They couldn't back out now. The job was too big, the opportunity too perfect. But if they triggered that alarm, it was over before it even began. Aman tapped his fingers against the desk. "There's one way around it," he said slowly. "But it's risky." Ravi's eyes flickered with interest. "I'm listening." Aman leaned forward. "We need to create a diversion, something that forces the security team to shut down the sensors for a few minutes." Amit frowned. "And how do we do that?" Aman's lips curled into a small smile. "By making them think something's wrong somewhere else in the building." The plan was changing, and that meant more risk. But Ravi knew that sometimes, the best tricks were the ones they made up on the spot. As they discussed the new strategy, the feeling of being watched still lingered in the back of Ravi's mind. And somewhere in the darkness, their watcher was already making a move. The night of the heist arrived, and the city was cloaked in silence, broken only by the occasional honk of a distant car. The museum stood tall and imposing, its grand structure bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. To most, it was just another building, a place of history and art. But to Ravi and his team, it was the ultimate test of their skills. From a rooftop across the street, they had a perfect view of the entrance. The guards moved in a predictable pattern, just as Ravi had anticipated. The cameras tilted from side to side, sweeping the area. Everything was as expected, except for the feeling that something was still off. Amon crouched near the ledge, his laptop glowing in the darkness. He had already breached the museum's security network. Now, all they needed was a reason for the guards to disable the motion sensors. His fingers moved quickly as he activated a false fire alarm on the opposite side of the building. Inside, a loud beeping sound echoed through the halls. The guards snapped to attention, their radios buzzing with hurried instructions. Just as they had hoped, one of them rushed to the control room to investigate. Within seconds, the motion sensors were temporarily deactivated to allow staff to check the area. Ravi signaled to Amit. "We go now." With silent precision, they scaled down the side of the building, landing softly on the rooftop of a lower section. A vent, already loosened earlier that week, served as their entry point. Amit crawled in first, followed by Ravi. The air inside was thick with dust, the narrow tunnel stretching into darkness. Amon's voice crackled through their earpieces. "You have 2 minutes before they realize the fire alarm is fake." Ravi and Amit moved swiftly, reaching the vent opening that led directly into the exhibit room. Below them, the artifact rested inside a glass case, its golden edges gleaming under the soft lights. Amit's breath hitched. "There it is." Ravi glanced at the security panel on the wall. "We need to disable the pressure sensors first." Amon was already ahead of him, working on it. Just a few more seconds. Every second felt like an eternity as Ravi watched the corridor outside. The guards were still distracted, for now. Then, just as Amon gave the all-clear, a noise echoed from the hallway. Footsteps. Ravi's pulse quickened. Someone was coming. They weren't alone. And this wasn't part of the plan. Ravi and Amit froze, their bodies tense as the sound of footsteps grew louder. This wasn't a random patrol. The rhythm was too controlled, too deliberate. Someone was heading straight toward them. Amit's breathing turned shallow. "What do we do?" he whispered, gripping the edge of the vent opening. Ravi's mind raced. If they moved now, they risked making noise. If they waited, whoever was coming might find them. Neither option was safe, but they didn't come this far to panic now. Amon's voice crackled in their earpieces. "Guys, you need to move. Now." Ravi didn't hesitate. He dropped soundlessly into the exhibit room, landing just outside the pressure sensor's boundary. Amit followed a second later, his feet barely making a sound on the polished floor. Just as they crouched behind the artifact's display case, the door to the room creaked open. A shadow stretched across the floor. Amit's grip tightened on his jacket. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then, to their shock, the figure stepped into the light. It wasn't a guard. It was a man in dark clothing, a black mask covering most of his face. And he wasn't holding a flashlight. He was holding a small device, the kind used to disable security systems. Ravi exchanged a glance with Amit. This wasn't just an unlucky visitor. This was another thief. The masked man didn't seem to notice them yet. He moved swiftly, his fingers working over the panel near the artifact's display case. He was doing exactly what they had planned to do. Amit's voice was barely a breath. "Who is he?" Ravi's jaw tightened. This was the worst possible scenario. Their plan had been precise, calculated down to the second. But now, someone else was running the same play. The stranger pulled out a small tool, preparing to crack the glass casing. That's when Ravi made his decision. Before Amit could stop him, Ravi stood up. "Step away from that." The masked man jerked up, startled. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met Ravi's. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the man smirked. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Ravi's stomach twisted. This wasn't a coincidence. This man knew about them. He had planned for them. The real question was, Who was playing who? Ravi's eyes locked onto the masked man's, reading every flicker of movement. This wasn't just another thief trying his luck. This was someone who had been waiting for them. Amit tensed beside him, but Ravi didn't back down. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping his voice low but firm. The man chuckled softly, twirling the small tool between his fingers. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. "What you should be asking is, how did I know you'd be here?" Ravi's stomach knotted. His mind raced through every possibility. Had someone in his team leaked their plan? Had they been followed? No, it had to be something else. The man stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You're smart, Ravi. One of the best. But you overlooked one thing." He tapped the security panel lightly. "This place doesn't just track motion. It tracks heat signatures. The moment you stepped inside, they knew." A cold realization hit Ravi. The guards weren't outside anymore. They were on their way. Amon's voice suddenly hissed through their earpieces. "Guys, get out. They're coming fast." Amit panicked. "We need to run." But the masked man held up a hand. Too late. Before Ravi could react, red emergency lights flashed across the room. A loud alarm blared through the building. Heavy boots pounded down the corridor. The masked man stepped back, lifting his hands as if in surrender. But there was something too calm about the way he moved. Ravi narrowed his eyes. "You planned this." The man smirked. "I needed a distraction. And you did it perfectly." Then, in a swift motion, he reached into his pocket and pressed a small remote. A sudden explosion, sharp and controlled, came from the west wing. Smoke burst through the air vents. The sound of shouting filled the museum as guards scrambled toward the chaos. And just like that, the masked man turned and bolted toward the emergency exit. Ravi didn't think. He chased after him. Amit hesitated for a split second before following. "Ravi, wait." They dashed through the smoke-filled corridors, their lungs burning. The masked man was fast, slipping through the museum's side passage with practiced ease. But Ravi was right on his heels. They burst into the open air behind the museum, the city stretching before them. The masked man turned, barely out of breath. Ravi lunged, grabbing his arm. "Who sent you?" The man smiled, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you?" Before Ravi could respond, the man twisted free, throwing something to the ground. A sudden flash, a blinding burst of light, forced Ravi to stumble back. And when the light faded, the man was gone. Amit ran up, coughing from the smoke. "Where did he?" Ravi clenched his fists. "He played us." The museum's sirens wailed behind them. Their plan had collapsed, their perfect heist ruined. But worse than that, someone had used them as pawns in a bigger game. And Ravi wasn't about to let that go. Ravi stood there, fists clenched, staring at the empty spot where the masked man had vanished. The sirens blared louder, echoing through the streets. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. They had planned every detail, accounted for every risk. And yet, they had been outplayed. Amit doubled over, hands on his knees, struggling to catch his breath. "What just happened?" he gasped. Ravi's mind was racing. Someone had set them up. But who? And more importantly, why? He turned to Amon, still connected through the earpiece. "Do we have anything on him? Camera footage, anything?" Amon's voice was grim. He knew what he was doing. Wiped his tracks. No ID, no digital footprint. Whoever he is, he's a ghost. Ravi exhaled sharply, frustration clawing at him. "We need to move. Now." They couldn't risk being caught near the museum. The heist had failed, but getting arrested would make things worse. Without another word, they slipped into the shadows, blending into the city's winding alleys. The flashing red and blue lights painted the buildings around them as security guards and police officers swarmed the museum. By the time they reached the safe house, exhaustion had set in. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with unspoken tension. Amit threw his jacket onto the chair and paced, running a hand through his hair. I can't believe this. We were so close. Aman shut his laptop, rubbing his eyes. This wasn't just bad luck. Someone knew our plan. Someone was one step ahead the whole time. Ravi sat down, his mind replaying every moment of the night. The stranger's words haunted him. I needed a distraction. And you did it perfectly. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. It wasn't about the artifact, he muttered. Amit and Aman looked at him. What do you mean? Ravi leaned forward, his voice low and steady. That explosion. The security team rushing away. He didn't want the artifact, he wanted something else. And we were just the cover. Amit frowned. So, what did he take? Aman quickly reopened his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. He pulled up the museum's security feed, rewinding past the chaos of the alarms. The footage was grainy, distorted by the smoke, but then, there it was. A shadowy figure slipping into a restricted storage room. A few minutes later, before the explosion, he emerged with a small, unmarked case in his hands. He had walked out unnoticed while every guard in the building had been focused on the fire alarm and the heist attempt. Aman zoomed in on the footage, trying to make out details, but the case had no visible markings. Amit shook his head. So, we don't even know what he took? Ravi's jaw tightened. No. But whatever it was worth more than anything in that exhibit room. A long silence stretched between them. The weight of the night settled in. They had been used, played like amateurs in a game they didn't even realize they were part of. Amit sighed, sinking into the couch. So, what now? We just let this guy get away with it. Ravi didn't answer right away. He wasn't the kind to chase ghosts. But something about this felt different. This wasn't just a failed heist. It was something bigger, something calculated. And if there was one thing Ravi hated, it was not knowing the full story. He stood up, grabbing his jacket. We find out who he is. We find out what he took. And then, he looked at them, his voice steady. We take back control. Aman smirked slightly, already pulling up more security feeds. Amit, though exhausted, nodded in agreement. The heist had failed. The artifact was gone. But the real game was just beginning. And Ravi wasn't about to walk away from it. Somewhere in the city, the masked man was celebrating his success. But he had made one mistake. He had let Ravi live to chase him.